Hello, everyone. I'm John Evans. Welcome to another episode of One-on-One. Maureen O'Boyle has told thousands of stories in her almost 40 years of broadcasting. She's told them on local newscasts across the country, including here in Wilmington and now where she works in Charlotte. She's told them on national news magazines like A Current Affair and Extra. But there's one story that Maureen told almost 27 years ago now that is the story that many people remember. That story changed Maureen O'Boyle's life, but it's also changed countless other lives all across the country since then. But that's just one reason why I wanted to have Maureen O'Boyle as my guest. Maureen O'Boyle, anchor, mom, advocate, volunteer, welcome to One-on-One with John Evans.
John, it is so good to be here with you and back there in Wilmington on WECT. It's been a long time.
It has been. You have worked on both coasts. You have worked in large markets. You have worked in smaller cities. What do you remember about working in this building here where I'm sitting now at 322 Shipyard Boulevard?
Oh, wow. I remember it was really hard because I arrived there first as a nightside reporter. So my job was MMJ, as we call it now. I had to shoot the stories, edit the stories, and then turn a package for the late news. Mm-hmm. And I was not that experienced. I think I was 19 years old. And no one asked me how old I was at the time. I had left East Carolina. That's a long story that I'd be happy to share with you as to why I left college. But I was already working in TV while I was in college, and I was teaching my teachers how to use video cameras and edit video when they said East Carolina would not have the mass communication or journalism program. And they said, just if you can get a job, get a job. And this was back in the 80s. And I said, okay, well, I'll give myself 24 hours. And if I can find a job in 24 hours where I get a contract and I have a real legitimate career starter, I will do it. And I did. And that's how I ended up in Wilmington. And it was really hard. It was a hard job for somebody who kind of was thrown into the fire. It wasn't anybody's fault at WECT, but it was a challenge for me to go out there and cover stories and turn packages in a quick, in a short amount of time.
And things are different. You and I are about the same age, and we've come through television starting in those 80s and now into the 2019 year. It's a lot different. I remember carrying cameras with the cables and the decks that slammed off our hips as we walked everywhere. Can you believe what has happened to this industry in the time we've been in it?
I actually shoot stories on my phone. Yeah. I edit and shoot stories on my phone now. And when I look at the gear, they walk out with this, what looks like a medium-sized purse, and it's got all their gear in it. Now, not their lights, but it's got most of what they need to go out and shoot breaking news. And it's remarkable to me when I think it was probably, and correct me if I'm wrong, 70 to 80 pounds worth of gear that we usually, between the deck and the camera and all of the cables. I remember when the Challenger exploded, I was working in Macon, Georgia. That's where I went after Wilmington. And this is in the day way before it was cool as an MMJ to just wear shoes that were appropriate for the job. You were still supposed to dress like a girl, in your high heels and your suit. And so here I was with 70 pounds of camera equipment at an arson fire, stepping over all of this glob and ruins of a home and water-soaked ash. And my walkie-talkie went off. And that's when I was told the shuttle Challenger had exploded. And I will never forget that moment. And that's when I was no longer thinking about shooting the story and sort of sunk into just being the person that I was and wasn't focusing in on getting, like this arsonist that was on the loose in Macon at the time. And I could really feel the weight of all that camera gear. It's odd because when we were out running around and shooting stories, it really didn't matter to me. But when the emotion of knowing the Challenger exploded, it was just so strange how I just stood there and said, I'm just thinking of these families. And then all of a sudden I realized I'm trapped underneath all this camera gear. And you know what I mean? You separate
Yeah.
yourself so much in the news business from the emotion of stories. And then there are those stories that you just cannot separate yourself from. And that was one of them.
I know your family moved a lot. You were the eighth of 10th children. Did you have an idea of what you wanted to do? Was television in your wheelhouse? What did a young Maureen want to do as she was growing up?
Okay, well, I just wanted to be heard. Pretty simple. When you're 8 of 10 children, it's either you speak the loudest, or you tell the best stories, or you tell the stories with an accent of any variety possible. So that was my thing, is that storytelling became the way at the dinner table. My dad had his own business by the time we settled back in Charlotte. We had moved all over the country. I was born here. We moved overseas, even came back. But when he moved to Charlotte, he was really, even though he had left corporate America, he was stressed out because he was running a small business. And he said, at dinner, it was very much formal. Tell us about your day, and I want to hear what happened and what happened to you. And I realized very early on, probably by third or fourth grade, that if I told my stories with more drama and pauses and volume, that my father would pay more attention and not call me like every other name in the book, but my own name. And so it was as a way to get my dad's attention, and as a way to sort of, I say storytelling and journalism is part of my birth order. It's just, I was a tattletale too. So I also spent a lot of time reporting on my brothers and sisters, what they did right and what they did wrong.
Well, you had a captive audience with 7 brothers and sisters in the house. Your first your first TV appearance was with your mom, though, I read.
Yeah, it was really cool. My mom, one day, I can remember her green Monte Carlo. Oh my gosh. And she was just a super mover and shaker. She just was a very progressive woman, even though she had all these children, and she really never had any help in the house or babysitters or things like that. She pretty much did it all on her own. She was always enrolled in college, and she was always doing things with the Sierra Club, and she always volunteered. And one of the things that connected her was PBS. So PBS people had connected through an organization with my mom, and they asked her, would you be a part of this show where we're talking to women in their 40s who have teenage daughters, about 14, and we're asking them each to talk about what their hopes and dreams are. And so my mom said, sure, I have a 14-year-old, let me ask her. And so she asked me, and we went and did this little TV show where it was called A Woman's World. They asked us what we wanted to do in our future. And I said, well, I want to be a businesswoman. I want to travel the world. I'm not quite sure what I want to do, but I definitely don't want to settle down at 19 years old like my mom did and get married and have all these children. I want a very different experience. And my mom said, when the interviewer asked my mom, she said, when you were 14, what did you want? And she said, I wanted to settle down and have a huge family because I only had one sibling. And it was just an interesting observation. It was a television show really just kind of opening the conversation about what are we doing for our daughters to help our daughters achieve these dreams that they have that are very, very different of what we had hoped for at their age. So at the end of this little TV show at the PBS station here in Charlotte, the producer pulled me aside and she said, I don't know what you plan on doing in the business world, but it has to be related to television. I couldn't quite understand what she meant. I was like, I really don't know what you mean.
Yeah.
And she said, you have to go into television. And she said, you're just a natural communicator. And that I got in the car and I told my mom, and my mom said, wow, that's a huge compliment. I said, wow, I don't really know how to process this. So it took me a while. I was learning disabled and it wasn't really recognized. So I struggled in school, and in my junior and senior year at West Charlotte High School, I got involved with Distributive Education Clubs of America, DECA, as it's called. It's a wonderful organization, especially for someone like me, who, while I could achieve, I did very well in certain classes, other classes I would lag behind. And DECA gave me an outlet, a very creative outlet, and an opportunity to go out and speak. So I would have to make presentations to business leaders.
Wow.
And so I was in high school going to the merchandise mart right here in Charlotte and making presentations on fashion ideas and swimsuit designs that I had to these business people. And they all said to me over and over again, "How old are you?" And I said, well, I had to act mature in my family to be heard at the dinner table. So that's why I can speak this way. And long and the short of it, it just sort of got the ball rolling between being encouraged to go into television, DECA really pushing me out there to find my voice, and then being a curious human being. It was kind of a natural fit. Before I knew it, I was in a radio class at ECU writing radio commercials. And then I got a call from one of my professors who said, someone heard you on the radio volunteering. They want to see, does she have a face for radio? And I was like, well, that's really inappropriate. But anyway, they asked that question, and then I auditioned. I didn't even have a car. I auditioned for the morning news anchor my freshman year, spring semester, hitched a ride with a graduate student, and that's how I got my first job, was doing the morning breaks at WITN in Little Washington, North Carolina. So,
yeah, as a college student, you had to be there at 3 a.m. And
yes.
I imagine, well, number one, that's not good for a social life, but I imagine at the age of 18, what a great training ground that was, though. Even though it didn't last tremendously long, it had to be a great first step into this business.
It was a shock to the system, to say the least, because it was one of those things where I was told, yeah, we've got a guy, he'll train you, he'll meet you there, and you'll learn the ropes. It's pretty easy. You're putting together a really miniature newscast. It's only 4 to 5 minutes long. And the guy showed up twice, and then I was basically on TV by myself, doing it all alone. So it was definitely, baptism by fire. And it was great, and it was wonderful. I learned a lot. It was my next job where I really got to flourish, because that job, I really was terrible. And I was trying to juggle, as you mentioned, going to work at 3 o'clock in the morning, rushing 20 miles back to classes at 9. And then I had a radio job on campus. And then I had a radio job at an AM radio station. So I was juggling way too many things at once. And it was my next job at WNCT, Channel 9 there in Greenville, where I had a mentor. I had, great friendships with people who encouraged me and said, you can do this. But the irony is that the person who fired me, if you will, let me go graciously from that very first job. He was my number one reference for the rest of my local news, and even into when I was going into national television. He was my number one reference, Lee Knipe. He's passed away now, but for years he always said, I hate to fire you. I have to fire you because you said the wrong TV station call letters on the air. And that's just basically, a no-no. Mm-hmm. And I was like, yeah, I kind of expected to be fired over that. I've made that big mistake. And because my dormitory did not get the station that I was on, so I was programmed to hearing WNCT in my head.
Right.
And when all of the tapes were eaten by the machine, all of a sudden the guy next to the camera was like, keep talking. And I was like, keep talking. What do I say? And I had this promo in my mind of WNCT. And so I just rattled off, join Clara Scott and the rest of WNCT's Eyewitness News team, covering Eastern North Carolina. And as I was saying it, I was like, I'm on WITN. This is not funny.
No.
And I'll never forget an older, she was probably maybe 28, woman in the newsroom looking at me and said, I guess we're not playing TV anymore now, are we, Miss Maureen? And she was very happy to see me out of there.
Ouch,
So
that's not very nice.
oh, it's not always the nicest industry. You know that,
Oh,
John.
I do.
But but so I ended up, this is where I know this, everybody believes in God, a higher power, whatever you want to believe in. I support anybody's choice to choose what they want to believe in. But I ended up going with my family on a family vacation. And it was like a belated, 10 years we've been talking about this vacation. Do you know that I met Miss Texas on the beach in France? And she said to me, as God is my witness, she said, well, I'm here before I go back to Texas and learn how to talk like an anchor, because I won Miss Texas and now I'm going to be an anchor in Dallas.
Wow.
And I thought, wait a minute, I carry camera gear and walk through arson, scenes and write stories and edit stories. And you got to be an anchor in Dallas just because you're pretty? That's not fair.
Yeah.
So it was, I believe, God's way of saying, Maureen, you got fired from your first job. You were terrible. You made a terrible mistake. But this is my way of showing you, you're not a beauty queen, but certainly you're a hard worker. Go back to that TV station that you spoke incorrectly of and ask them for a job and volunteer there. So that's what I did. I went to that TV station and just said, can I just come here once a week and I'll volunteer. If you don't have an internship, I'll make coffee. I'll cut up newspapers and come up with story ideas. And basically it just snowballed from there.
Yeah, I did my story was I was an intern in the summer, and back then in 1983 when I interned at a TV station, they didn't have the concerns with insurance and everything else like they do now.
Exactly.
So I just kept going back after my internship for free. And first part-time job that came open, it was the February of the following year, 1984. I got a part-time job, and I've been in TV ever since. So I'm right there with you.
I love it. That's why I always tell every single student that I speak to, get an internship. Because once you've got a foot in the door, we have so many producers here, John, and probably you too, that were once our interns. One of our best on-air reporters now was an intern here at one point. So, nowadays though, it is a little different. You can't work for free or gas money.
Yeah.
Because I think I got $20 every 2 weeks, and it was enough for my Toyota Corolla with 200,000 miles on it to make it to and from Greenville to the TV station and back for 2 weeks. So
I was just happy to be able to go and cover Penn State football and not have to buy a ticket. I was on the sidelines of Penn State football in 1983 and watching this top 10 football team, and I was doing sports at the time, but that was my entryway, and that's how I'm going to lump you in with me. That's how we did it. We broke in by giving those extra days on our open time. And just like you, when you came to Wilmington, was there one lesson that you learned before you left for Macon that you really learned here in this town, and when you were anchoring the new newscaster and Nightside Reporter?
Oh, wow. I can't say that there was one lesson that I learned in general. First of all, I loved the people there. I absolutely adored the people. And I was there, John, at a really cool time when the North Carolina Film Institute, as it was called at the time, when Dino De Laurentiis was there and they were making Cat's Eye. And so it was fun. I was able to be an extra in a movie in the behind, way background, and ended up hanging out with some people who were the stars of one of their movies and learning how to cook some cool dishes because I love to cook. So it was a really exciting time to be in Wilmington. Everybody that lived there during that time just reminisces about how fun it was to be there. But it was really WECT and my news director there and coworkers who taught me a lot. I realized that humility was super important. And with humility comes asking for help. There were a lot of times I was crashing a story for the late news. I'm in the edit bay, and I really should have stopped and walked out into the newsroom and found someone to help me, because there would be like either a jump cut or there would be a black hole for a second, and it was not cool. Mm-hmm. So I learned to ask for help at that station. And then I learned too to make sure everything is in writing, because my next job in Macon, Georgia, I went to, and Tony Villasano was doing nothing wrong when he made me this offer, but he made me this very big, grand offer of a future at this station in Macon, Georgia. And the people in Wilmington said, you got to make your decision. Like you've only been here a short time, and we've elevated you a lot, and we've given you a lot of opportunities. And I didn't get it all in writing. So when I got to Macon, Georgia, it was awful.
Yeah.
I mean, I went from the dream job, living in the coolest historic apartment complex. Claude Howell, the artist, lived on the top floor. It was a beautiful place right by the fountain there in Wilmington Historic District. And I went from living there, working in this vibrant TV station with all of these veterans as well as young people, awesome behind the scenes crew, to going to Macon, which was great, but I worked from 3 a.m. until 6 p.m. at night.
Oh, wow.
Uh-huh. And I had nothing in writing when I went there. It was, and this whole big promise of the future, it never materialized. But I was so naive. I just trusted. And Tony was really fair. He didn't do anything wrong. If he's ever out there, he knows that I've never taken anything against him for what he did. He was doing business the way business is done. I should have known, get every last promise in writing, or at least as part of a contract. So I learned to ask for help in Wilmington, and I learned to get it in writing.
Yeah, those are two really good lessons. When you moved to Macon, and the unfortunate incident that happened there, I don't want to and would never ask you to replay that.
Right.
But you have used that and the tragedy that happened to you, yeah, in such a huge way to help so many others. First off, I want to tell you how much I respect you for that. Because it takes somebody of some huge mental fortitude to be able to dig down deep and tell your story like you did. And I want to get into that in a minute. But I've read your account, and you say at one point in time that terrible morning that this happened, that you felt like you were going to die.
Yeah, I was told repeatedly I was going to die, yeah.
For those of us who have never been that close to thinking that, what was that second or that moment like? Again, I don't want to, and please, if I'm prying too much, please tell me.
No, John. I'm happy, and for those people who aren't familiar with my story, because there are some people who don't know, I had been stalked over a year by somebody who had been breaking into my home and actually like living in among my things while I was at work every day. So I had that 3 a.m. to 5:30, 6 p.m. shift in Macon. Yeah. And this stalker, I didn't even know, was in my apartment every day. I would say to people, my coffee mug has moved, or, I can't find something. And they'd say, oh, this is the shift. The shift makes people so tired. You're just abnormal. Everyone's abnormal. So when the assault happened, when I was woken up by James Starling, who's in prison, and he told me he was going to kill me, at that very moment, I'll tell you exactly what I thought. And this is where my faith has always been based on the way God has always been with me, is that at that very moment, I could feel the words coming through from me. They were not my words. And I said, you will not kill me. I will not die here. My nephew was born 3 days ago. There is no way you will kill me. And it completely threw him off guard, because he had everything there to kill me. He had an array of weapons and all kinds of luggage to pack me in. He was going to put me all over the county so nobody could find me. And I know I did not have that ability to come up with that in that very moment. I know it was God. And I screamed, of course, before those words came out of my mouth. I shrieked. I don't even think it was an audible scream. There's a scream that can happen, and if anybody's watching who's been through a traumatic experience, even a car crash, sometimes you think you scream, but you really, nothing is coming out.
Yeah.
Because my neighbors later told me they never heard the screams. So what I, and thank you for saying that you appreciate me coming forward. What I decided after living through that and after helping the police catch him, which took a lot of work, and thank God my mother had a criminal justice degree, and we really worked hard to track down who this man was through lots of interviews with other rape victims. We just started putting the pieces together. We realized he was a serial rapist who had been hurting women since he was 14 years old. So we were able to find out who he was. We were able to get him arrested. He confessed to everything. Thank God there was no real trial. But the only reason why I ever went public is I really never had intended to be honest with you, because I was single. I was 24 years old at the time I got my first national TV show, and someone outed the story. They sold it to one of the tabloids.
Really?
And I had been in the ladies' room of the office building that we housed our show in, and I was crying to someone saying it's the anniversary of this bad thing that happened to me, and it's always it's a hard day for me. And she said, "What was it? What happened?" And I told her, and I didn't know someone else was in the ladies' room at the time, and that person then sold the story. So. And as bad as that sounds, that was also God's work, because God completely knew that by the story coming out, it would force me, one, to confront the devil in the experience and the way that experience was controlling my life. And it would also give me an opportunity to give voice to all those women who have suffered sexual assault, child molestation, stalking, post-traumatic stress disorder, who've never dealt with it. So as horrible as that was, and as horrible as the whole obvious experience was horrific, I was forced by that woman selling my story to get deeper therapy, to work harder on getting through it, and to find a voice to help others, And so I see everything like there's a term in many different 12-step programs where they say God never gives you more than you can handle. And preachers use it. People post it on Instagram all the time. You see it, you see it in Snapchat filters. I really believe that God has never given me more than I could handle. So that experience, I almost feel as though he allowed that to happen to me because he knew of all the work he had planned in my future because of it. I know that sounds weird.
No.
I know that sounds weird, but I believe God knew all the different layers that would happen well beyond that moment when I was there in Macon, Georgia. I really believe that.
Do you have, and I imagine you would have, had people then come up to you later, because once you told the story in People magazine, have you had people come up later out of the blue and say, thank you? Because I can imagine, like many of us, we do things and we do events, or we help with nonprofits, and we don't know who we're going to help by raising funds and stuff like that. But in that instance, it would seem to me that you would have touched people that you'll never, ever know how many people you touched. And I'm interested to see how many people or how many times people have come up to you and said, Maureen, thank you. You don't know why, but thank you.
Yeah. That's when I get so choked up when I'm asked that question, because it happens every day. It happens literally every day. I get an email, or I get a post privately on Facebook, or I just get a knowing look at a grocery store. And it chokes me up because, one, it's sad that so many people have been victimized through sexual assault or harassment or molestation. But at the same time, it just shows the power that we by sharing our stories, how we help not only ourselves heal more every day, I'm still healing. I mean, I still have basically a form of post-traumatic stress disorder. I mean, you can't be held hostage for 5.5 hours and told repeatedly you're going to be killed and not have some long-term effect from that. But more importantly, I know I'm helping people. And the beautiful thing is, John, are the grandmothers. I have this one woman, and I love her. I'll only say her first name, but she and I have become such good friends. She's in her 80s, and she said, I literally can hardly describe this without crying. She wrote to me when my petition went out there, when he was up for parole,
Right.
and she said, I was never allowed to tell anybody what happened to me by my parents and everybody who knew that what happened to me, because he was a prominent person in our church. And she said, and because of that, I held it in and I never told anyone. She said, and I've never gotten help. She said, and you've given me a chance to share my story. And she and I wrote back and forth. We sent letters and emails and texts, and now we talk on the phone. And she sent me a Christmas card that said, thank you for giving me my life. She's like, I'm ending my life so much differently than I always thought the end of my life would be. She's in her 80s. She said, I never thought that I could be free again, like that I could finally know it wasn't my fault and know
Wow.
that he was wrong and know that I should have had justice and that my family should have fought for me and that people were wrong to not help me. So yeah, when those things happen, I just don't even feel worthy to be that person, you know?
Well, I'll tell you what, you could take the microphone off today and hand in your badge out there at WBTV today and walk away and have accomplished a whole hell of a lot more than I believe I will have accomplished in this life, but just by sharing that story. And the amazing thing to me is, as you take this all the way and circle all the way back around, a conversation with your own daughter in 2016 helped you, it seems to me, kind of close another door in this whole chapter by making sure that he didn't come up for parole.
That's exactly right. We were both obsessed with this song, Till It Happens to You by Lady Gaga. And that was a really raw film depicting sexual assault. And she wrote it really about her own sexual assault and basically gave it to the filmmakers to use in their movie. And she was up for a Grammy Award. And we just happened to turn on the TV right at the exact moment she was up for the Grammy. And the song started playing. And Keegan asked me, how old would that man be that did that to you? And that was kind of code. We always would talk about it, but we never used the term rape. We never used the term the criminal. We never used the term. We just always that man that did that thing, you know. And because she was relatively young. And I thought, oh my gosh. And, you know, Google's been around for a while, but I just hadn't Googled him in a long time. And I had moved from New York to upstate New York, then to Charlotte, and then moved to a new place in Charlotte. And I thought, I haven't heard from the Pardons and Parole Board in a long time. And I Googled and it said he was up for parole in like a month.
Wow.
Or a month and a half or 6 to 8 weeks. It was crazy. And that's where you have to believe in something higher than ourselves.
Yep.
That would lead her to ask the question and me to Google and that song to be on. And so that's when I started the petition. And that petition on change.org, I just wrote about what happened to me and said, I know there are a lot of other people who've been through similar experiences. It just snowballed. I mean, it got shared by one website and then another person and another, you know, well-known person. And before I knew it, there were 72,000 signatures. And my daughter and I went to the Pardons and Parole Board, which they don't allow you to. So they only let me meet with one member of the Pardons and Parole Board. And there were some other people from the DA's office there as well, from Macon, Georgia. And we just pleaded with them. We said, do you really understand how sick this person is? And that he had a map, you know, depicting every break-in and peeping Tom crime and assault that he had committed. He had a map,
Wow.
in this garage where he could see all of the places where he had victimized people. And I said, that person, no matter how many years he's spent in confinement, it's very rare for them to get the type of mental health help they need. And really, their brains are hardwired. Now, I've never been able to independently confirm this. So I'll say this to make sure that, I want to make sure that this is clear. And if it's ever edited, that we use that part. I do not have this independently confirmed, but during some of the psychotherapy sessions he was given in order to determine sentencing and to come to those of us victims and to discuss it with us, the therapist told us that he had been molested as a child. So that cycle that we talk about of abuse and never getting healed and never getting the help, where it can just turn into this nonstop tragedy. So I knew that if he had not talked about it and had not gotten help and not gotten therapy, even if he'd been in prison for 30 years, he was not going to get out and be a changed man. So I fought to keep him behind bars.
It's amazing.
And I don't want to sound like a champion or anything like that. You know what I mean? I'm just a regular person who used this website. I happen to have a TV job, so that sort of helped. But more than anything, the stories that came from it of people who said, I never got any justice. My rapist was never caught. The man who assaulted me as a child never faced the justice system. That healing process was probably greater than keeping him behind bars.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Sure. Yeah. But I also think, and again, I'm going to salute you here, is that you put the raw video on of the day you got the phone call, and I've seen the raw video of the day you got the phone call, and even with your arm in the sling, and I noticed that day too. Yeah. I don't know what had happened. I don't know if that was
broken it working out.
Yeah, sports injury from what I was told.
Yes.
But, it for those of us who do work in this industry where, the ego takes over sometimes and you want to look good, to post yourself online crying when you get that kind of news, it takes guts. It takes guts to be able to do something like that. And again, it's part of the high respect that I hold for you, in that you're able and willing to do that.
John, I think a lot of people would be willing to do it if we didn't have so much shame associated with it. And that's part of the reason why I never stopped this conversation, because we did nothing wrong. I never did anything wrong, no matter if I wore a beautifully fitted suit to work every day in Macon, Georgia, and he obsessed on that, or wore high heels, I fixed my hair. Nothing we do ever makes it right. Mm-hmm. So I don't want to be, lauded for that. I just want to keep the conversation going. Mm-hmm. And I mean, you see me tear up because I still think that we still have a long way to go. We're not there yet. We still have to make sure that we are. And I appreciate you so much. I mean, I know that we just talked about getting to know each other, and I didn't, I figured maybe we would come to this conversation. And if this is the only part that you use, I thank you for using it, because I want this conversation to keep going.
Right.
I know that my healing, it's made better every day by others who are survivors who say they too are healing. I had a very well-known sheriff in our 22 county DMI, as we call it in television. Mm-hmm. I had a sheriff reach out to me and say he was molested. And he cried on the phone to me and said, "Can you believe here I am? I'm running this huge department and I've never told anyone."
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So we need to take away the shame from victims and stop making them feel like, ooh. And I left Macon, Georgia, to go to Spokane, Washington, the day he was put behind bars. But I walked into my bank that was right around the corner from my TV station, and two women who were tellers, and they probably have had some pretty rough experiences in life for doing this. They actually said, "There's that anchor that was raped as I walked in, and every single person in line turned and looked at me and looked up and down at me. And I called a headhunter and I said, "Can you get me out of Macon, Georgia in 24 hours?" And he got me a job in Spokane, Washington, and I left in 24 hours.
Man.
I mean, I was treated like I was a bad guy, and I said, "No way." And that's one of the reasons why I will not stop talking about why we have to take the shame away from the victims and put it on the criminals.
You have been very gracious with your time today. There's one topic that I want to talk to you about. I want to go a little bit different. You went out to and did a current affair for a while, and number one, doing local news to a national program. What was that transition like for you? And I want to get into the side topic here in a second, but I'd like to know, for those of us who have been in local news for in my entire career, was there a oh my goodness, I don't know if I can do this moment early on in this whole process?
Well, I mean, first of all, I was overwhelmed because I had to turn 7-minute packages in 2 days. So it was a news magazine. So I had to fly all over the country, shoot a story, and make a 7-minute story, which we're used to a minute 30, in 48 hours. So that was difficult. But every single story that we did in the beginning, when I first went there, when the show first debuted, it was a local story somewhere. So every single story had its roots in local news, and that's how we found out about it. So it wasn't at that time a celebrity-driven show. We weren't talking about Michael Jackson. We weren't talking about O.J. Simpson. That, of course, became a news event when O.J. Simpson was driving the Bronco. I was no longer there by then. But every single story. So it's funny, when you go to YouTube and you Google many of the stories, or, Maureen O'Boyle, a current affair, almost every single story, it was a news story on a newscast in a local market. Now, we used music. We used recreations of, like, scene setting recreations, which was at the time unheard of. So that's what the talk was about. There was a lot of conversation about, they're recreating scenes. Well, that's done every single day now on news magazines, from 48 Hours to Dateline. And even in local news now, we show money exchanging hands, that our photographers shoot to a reporter exchanging hands, and that's a recreation of somebody paying someone at a scene, which it really didn't. You know what I mean?
Sure.
So it was difficult because the work was different in that it was a long format, but I was still telling local stories. So that part of it was not that different. When I became the anchor, that was very different, because the anchor on that show, obviously I took over for Maury Povich. The anchor on that show, it was the anchor's job to be the one that was the real drama of each intro and outro, and they wanted me to be more like Maury, and I can't be Maury. I'm Maureen. We have the same first three, 4 letters of our names, but that's it. But so it was a big transition in that I had to anchor very differently. But I was part of a transition, that really happened, to change the face of television. Some would say for the worse, some would say for the better.
Well, that's where I wanted to go, is that, when people ask me when TV news kind of changed, there's a couple of different places. When CNN came on, when headline news came on. But to me, a current affair was one of those real foundations that split it, because it looked like a newscast. It looked like a national newscast with a newscaster on a news set. But unlike when you started, when those stories were ingrained in local news, then it started to do the stories that were never really mentioned on network news. And it kind of took the industry a different way, good or bad, whatever you want to say.
Right.
But that's what I point to when people ask me, John, when do you think television news changed? To me, CNN, and then headline news, and then to me it was a current affair. Your thoughts?
Yeah, it was when we could hold up someone like Jim Baker and say, okay, here's a man who's made millions upon millions upon millions of dollars, when he was getting the money from sweet little ladies who believed in him, like my grandmother, and finding out that he was living this really over the top, lavish lifestyle and living a double life, really. So those types of stories were some of the stories that we did that put us on the map. It was definitely the PTL scandal, Jessica Hahn, of course, the irony is that you think about the Tanya Harding stories and the ice skating rivalry.
Mm-hmm.
That was on the network news within a week of it happening, because we realized there was that hit. It was much deeper than just an accident. We covered it from the very beginning because we had word that it wasn't an accident. So I don't know. I don't feel. I know that every single night on this newscast, for this TV station, and for this company, we focus on a motto that we live by in every aspect of our newscast, which is on your side. And we look at stories for their value. We had a story that went viral yesterday where this group of teenagers is seen gathering around a man at the Asheville Mall, shared millions of times on YouTube and Facebook, and viewed millions of times. We never showed that video because we asked ourselves, is this video valuable to the story? No. What are we doing? We are perpetuating what maybe these teenagers wanted, which was to show them surrounding this man and then getting assaulted by the man because he was feeling so entrapped by them, or because he was a bad guy. We don't know the whole story yet, but we chose not to show that video. So I feel very grateful that I'm working in a position and at a television station where the values of our station are so strong that we're not just showing videos and just showing stories to get viewers. We're really committed to enlightening people and making their lives better.
And I think to those of us who do it that way on a daily basis, and to those of us who want to be on the higher ground, as it were, there are those decisions that I don't think the audience realizes are made on a daily basis, and why we choose not to show the video that I saw yesterday. And got to admit, it turned my stomach a little bit when I saw that same video.
Horrible.
You had success at A Current Affair. You were at Extra. You had your own show for a while. And then you got out when your daughter was born.
Yes.
Was it that got you out, and then what got you back in? Because you took a little hiatus from anchoring and from television and from journalism.
John, it's hysterical because when you say I took a little hiatus, I took a little hiatus into a little house. I moved into a 1,000 square foot 110-year-old log cabin on 28 acres where we had bear, where we had deer, we had muskrats in our pond. It was an amazing life. It was a great place to raise my daughter and to allow her creativity to flourish as a toddler. I mean, she was painting. It was beautiful. It was the most fabulous time of my life. And now when I talk to her about it, and she's like, I really don't remember that. I'm like, what? Wait a minute, you don't remember it? And she's like, no, I don't really remember it. I remember it from the pictures. I'm like, well, it's that cup that I filled up, that all the love that I gave you and the encouragement that I gave you to be yourself and to be creative. That's in you. And that came from that time when I was focused only on you and not my career. So it's in you. You just don't remember it. Mm-hmm. I just got to a point where I was in the rat race in LA. It was never my style. I wasn't aggressive, and I wasn't plotting my future. And my agent was saying, you're just not this kind of girl. You're not you're not cut out for this business the way you if you were, you would have already had a production company, you would have a publicist, you would have an entourage wherever you went, you would be going to all these Hollywood parties. I never went out. I just found myself lonely in Los Angeles. And when I had my daughter and I decided I couldn't stay at Warner Brothers, I thought, well, I've kept this little log cabin in the woods for a reason, and the renters were out, and I moved there. It was the best decision I've ever made. Now, selling it was the worst decision I ever made, but the market had changed drastically, and it was really to my advantage to sell it. But getting back into local news, I started corresponding with the general manager here, who was a woman, and Mary was amazing. She just asked me to start blogging about my life in my log cabin. And so I just did. Every day I wrote her an email about motherhood, about living in this log cabin, about being away from the rat race of Los Angeles and away from New York City. I was about 90 miles outside of New York, near Woodstock. And after writing to her over the course of several months, she said, you know what, we think you need to come home, and we think we can find a way to work you into our lineup and maybe give you a job anchoring. So I came here really not knowing what my job was going to be, but it was just wonderful to know that I was going to be able to have my daughter with her 16 nieces, cousins, my nieces and nephews, and my mom and dad were both alive at the time, and all of my brothers and sisters. And in New York, we didn't have that. So I was able to, she was baptized in the same church that I was baptized in. So,
that's awesome that you were able to come home like that and be able to do that in your hometown. When you go on the air every day, you're a mom, you're a survivor, you're a journalist. Is there one that comes through more than any other?
Wow, that's tough. I don't think you can compartmentalize yourself. That's why if viewers who see this, which I'll hope to share this to my Facebook page, people who know me, there are times when I cannot keep my emotions intact. And I will at times get very red-eyed, like I'm about to start crying, because it's hard to separate. When you find out about a child that we've been searching for is sadly dead, or a body's been discovered and it's a person who had Alzheimer's that you were looking for. And I know personally from my grandmother having Alzheimer's what a tragedy that is. So it's hard. You can't really compartmentalize. You have to find strength in all the people who are working behind the scenes with you to sort of hold you up and know that this is their work that you are presenting and your contribution as well, that you don't want to derail the entire newscast by losing it. But it's important for me as a survivor to make sure our language is right. I can't stand when I hear people on the news say, charged with child porn. It's not porn, it's child pornography.
Right.
You know what I mean? This is a victimization. This is not a child who's performing in a porno movie. It's pornography, and it's a crime. When it's against a child or someone under the consenting age. So there are certain things that my producers already I've preached to them, but I try to be an advocate in any way I can when it's appropriate. But I can't really compartmentalize all of those things. They come out, they come out in me. Like we had a segment the other night in which my meteorologist, our chief meteorologist, who was adopted, who does a series on adoption, surprised me on the air with the number of kids who've been adopted since we started the series. And I just started bawling on TV because he surprised me. He had told me once, don't ask how many kids have been matched up with parents because it's a long process and you'll put too much pressure on me. I'm doing the best I can. We're doing it. I said, okay, I won't ever ask. And so I never asked. And then on the air at the beginning of the new year, he surprised me and I just lost it. I just started bawling. So sometimes you can't help it. Just be who you are,
Yeah, I've got that. There are some that, being a dad with two daughters, whenever a young female is victimized, it registers in the back. My wife's a breast cancer survivor. Whenever we do breast cancer stories, I've got a nephew who is autistic, who, whenever we do stories about autism, I want to make sure that same thing happens. So we have I don't think sometimes they think we're robotic on the air and that we don't have those feelings, but there are some of those stories that register a little bit deeper than others. Yeah. And I wanted to run that by you because I know that, as a mom, as a survivor, but also as a journalist with high standards, you've got these things that play in your mind with every story that you deliver every day.
Well, John, I have so much respect for you. I mean, you are you're so loved at WECT and in the communities that you serve. And I'm just honored that you took time to talk to me. I feel humbled and just really, my hat's off to you, because you're just really a legend. You're younger than me, I think. So technically, am I allowed to call you a legend?
Yeah, I think so. I once interviewed an all-star center fielder for the Phillies that he said I'd rather be called an institution before they put me in one, and I've kind of kept that. There are two questions I ask everybody on this podcast.
Okay.
It's been a good day when blank.
I can deliver a pot of homemade chicken soup to my mother who has pneumonia today.
Oh, wow. Well, best to your mom. We want to make sure she gets better. I don't like it when blank.
I am critical of myself instead of showing myself self-love and self-care.
Are you hard on yourself?
Yeah, I'm pretty hard on myself. Yeah, that's a downside to me. I don't have the most confidence at times, and I need to work on that. And usually there's an equation that helps that, and that part of that equation is my physical fitness routine is on point. My charity work is on point. My writing is on point. My family time is on point, and those have been a little bit out of whack through the holidays. So right now I've been a little bit more critical of myself, just because I'm not doing all of the things that I like to have in my schedule to make me feel really good about myself. But I'm working on it.
So I'm not the only one that's really critical of myself either. It's good to know that somebody else with your background and your career is also as hard on herself as I am on myself on a daily and a nightly basis.
It's so funny because, John, I feel like people, because we have, we got makeup on and we're kind of, I don't know, coiffed and dressed up every night. But we're just, the only thing different between us and those people who are working maybe at the pharmacy, or maybe they're teaching, or maybe they're a lawyer, or maybe they're working at the checkout at the local grocery store. The only thing that separates us is a camera. And our job is to tell stories clearly, accurately, and honestly. But then we have this kind of physical facade. And it's important for us to break down that wall with the viewer, so that this physical facade does not disallow, if you will, does not make it impossible for people to relate to us as the human beings that we are. We're members of the same community we're reporting on. Mm-hmm. So we have the same concerns that they do. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, one thing I know for sure is that the Charlotte, Mecklenburg County, and that 22-county region in North Carolina, in the western part of North Carolina, is lucky that Maureen O'Boyle is there, and that you do serve the public in every way you do. You're always doing different things. I'm always seeing the WPTV page, your Facebook page, your Instagram. You're always volunteering. You're emceeing this, and you've been very generous with your time today. I really, truly appreciate it. It's been fun for me, because I've always wanted to talk to you about these issues, and I'm so glad that we found the time to be able to do this.
Oh, well, thank you, John, and continued wellness to your wife. I'm so happy that she's a survivor, and I know you've got to be proud of your daughters, and I hope they shoot for the stars and realize all of their dreams. I'm sure with a dad like you, they will.
Maureen, thanks for taking the time today and being on the podcast.
Okay, thank you.
A big thank you to Maureen O'Boyle for taking some time today for the podcast interview. She is a classy lady and one of the best in this business. If you'd like to get a hold of her, one way to do it is go to WBTV.com. That's the station where she works in Charlotte. Her email address is on that website, but she's also very active on Facebook and Instagram as well. Before we go, I'd like to ask you to please rate and review our podcast. I really would like to know what you think of the podcast episodes we do. And the more ratings and reviews we get, the more listeners we'll be able to get on all of our podcast apps. I'm John Evans. Thanks so much for joining us for this week's episode of One on One.